Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. I have a strange story that occurred back when I was in middle school that I genuinely cannot explain. Back then, I didn't have many friends, but the friends that I did have were pretty close. We were a bit of a clique, but when you don't have many people to talk to or do things with, that sort of thing does happen. My group of friends included 3 other guys. We'll just call them J, T, and P. And the 4 of us were super close all throughout elementary school, and we were more like a small band of brothers than just casual friends. This continued up to middle school as well. We had several classes together, so it worked out pretty well. The second quarter of the second year of middle school, which would have made it 8th grade I think, we ended up adding a 5th person to our little group of friends, a boy named Mark. I'm using Mark's name because he's probably the most important person in the story, as the event is about him specifically, and for other reasons that may make sense later. Mark had apparently gone to the same elementary school as us, though he wasn't in the same class as the 4 of us, and we had never met him. I remember when I asked him about it, he had mentioned that he was in my class in 4th and 6th grade, but I couldn't remember him being in the classroom. He knew the teachers' names, and he knew other kids in the rooms, which told me that he wasn't lying at all. I felt bad, but I just couldn't recall him being there. Now, the reason that we had added Mark to our friend group is kind of strange. He just kind of showed up one day during the morning and at lunch, like he'd always been there. He acted like he had always been part of our group. He was talking to us, laughing about things that only we would have found funny. It was seriously as if he was one of us from day one. But he just kind of showed up and sat with us one day. I know, that may not sound too weird to some people. Maybe he was just really charismatic. But it was weird, and it got weirder. Not because he was there, but because of what happened after that second quarter. In between the second and third quarter is winter break, which is basically that week and a half or so where we didn't have classes. During this time, I had to spend the entire week at my grandparents' house at my parents' request, so I didn't get to spend any time with my group of friends. I was really bummed out about it, and J, T, and P promised me that they wouldn't do anything too stupid without me, as I was always the one getting into trouble. I spent my time there, and then when it came to go back to school, I noticed that Mark wasn't there on the first day back. I didn't think much of it. People get sick when they have all their holiday get-togethers. Maybe he was just sick and going to be back the next day. Now, mind you, at this point, I didn't mind Mark, but I didn't really feel like he was one of the boys, if that makes sense. I had an issue with him just kind of showing up and thinking that we had to accept him as one of us, but I didn't dislike him. He was an okay kid, and he was a pretty funny guy as well. Then the next day, I noticed that there was still no Mark, and I ended up asking Jay if he had heard from him, and he asked me who I was talking about. T and P both said the same thing. They didn't know anyone named Mark. I thought they were messing with me at first, just trying to pull one over on me. And then when Mark came back, they would pretend like I was crazy and that they never said anything about not knowing him. That was until I asked our math teacher, the only class that I had with Mark, if Mark was just out sick or if he was okay. She had no idea who I was talking about. I described Mark, said his last name to her, told her that he was a funny kid with the short dark hair and glasses that usually sat next to me. And she seriously looked at me like I was insane. She said that the person that sat next to me was a girl in class named Deborah, and that she would be back in class the next day. But there was never anyone named Mark that sat next to me, and no one by that name in the class at all. This set me on a really weird and confused path. I actually went back to try and find Mark in any of the elementary school yearbooks. I checked my 7th grade yearbook as well, and I couldn't find him at all. I checked my 4th and my 6th grade books, and there was never anyone named Mark, last name starting with a G, in either of those classes or the other classes for those years. In fact, there were no Marks nor any students with last names starting with G's in either year. It was like he was just wiped from the face of the earth entirely, and I was the only one to remember him. It was really strange that this kid that showed up one day like he knew who we all were and had always been our friend disappeared as quickly as he integrated into our group. I really didn't know what to make of this, and I still don't. Like I said, I didn't mind the guy. He wasn't my best friend or anything, but to get to know someone over a couple of months, spend mornings and lunch with him, and have math class with him, only to have him simply disappear without a trace, it made me feel like I was crazy. I know that this wasn't a hallucination, as my other friends interacted with him, and it was seriously a couple of months, and there's no way that I hallucinated a friend for that long. But in the end, I just had to accept that this person didn't exist and then move on. Something that I hated doing, but it didn't matter how much I talked about him because no one else knew who he was. I do hope that nothing bad happened to him, and I hope that if he was from another timeline or something, that he and I stayed friends. Unfortunately, in this reality, he just simply never existed. I have a story that honestly sounds like a bit of an urban legend, but it actually happened to me back whenever I had moved to the small town that I used to live in back in spring of 2003. I don't want to give out my exact location, but I will say that I lived in a small town in the southern part of the Midwest, in a town that was definitely more rural than urban. It was a nice little community, and I chose to move there because the company that I worked for was expanding into the neighboring city, which was only about a 20-minute drive away. I wanted to be close to my new home office, but I kind of wanted to avoid actually living in the city itself. So, I compromised and I moved into the small town on the outskirts. Like I mentioned, it was nice, and for the most part, it was just the people who lived there, a general store, the church, and a few other small businesses. As is the case with most small towns, there were a few warnings to those that were new, specifically to avoid certain places outside of the town to the west, which is where the whole urban legend thing comes into play. Nothing screams campfire story like being told to avoid two places: the old mines and the forest that had grown over it. I actually asked someone why I should avoid the forest and if it was because the land was unstable from the mine. And they told me that, well, there were things that were far worse in the woods than unstable ground. Again, I know this literally sounds like a horror movie because that's what I was thinking the entire time. I had just moved there, and I was being warned about things in the woods, and people were being ominous about everything involved. This was literally the plot to a scary movie that I swear I saw back in the early 90s. And much like those movies, I was going to go ahead and just treat these warnings as noise. I wasn't much of a rebel. I just wasn't going to let some nonsense pull me away from the walking trails in the unincorporated parts of the hiking areas. When I moved to the town, I told myself that on the weekends, I was going to make more time to become in tune with nature, and that I was going to take my dog, Maddie, hiking out in the woods so that she could get used to it as well. About a month into living there, I finally decided that it was time to put my plan into action. It was a bright, beautiful springtime Saturday. It was warm, the sun was out early, and the air was just perfect. When I got up, I knew right then and there that this would be the day that I took Maddie out onto the trails for a nice hike, and that it would be the start of a new hobby for us. So I got dressed for it. I got Maddie all sorted out, got a backpack full of water and food just in case, as well as whatever essentials I thought that we would need, and I was beyond ready to go. We drove out to the walking path and parked in the lot near the park. I took a while to study the map that was posted, and I looked at how the trails curved. I made a note of how things were situated in my head, in case I got lost and had to use a compass to get back. Being 2003, I didn't have a smartphone or a GPS to get me back anywhere. After a good amount of debating how I wanted to take it, I went ahead with a plan, and I started out into the woods. Now, my plan had me going on the walking trail that would circle back from the west, around the south, and then reconnect at the east. However, at the furthest south of the trail, you could keep going and you could hit that spot of land that people warned me about. I, of course, was going to check this area out. If for no other reason, I was going to just prove that it was all a bunch of bull. So there we went. Maddie and I got out onto the trails, walked around, and after a while I decided that I was at the right spot and started to head off the trail toward where the area was that I was told not to go. At first, it wasn't that bad. It was just a thicker area of trees with no real distinct marks. But after a while, it did start to get a bit strange. As I pressed on, I noticed that there were spots where the trees seemed to just be dead. I mean, completely lifeless, which isn't necessarily too out there, but it was weird to see some random trees that were just completely void of leaves in the middle of this lush forest. And as I moved south, the dead trees started to become more abundant until I hit a circle of them that was completely brown and decrepit. At this point, Maddie started whimpering and pushing against my leg, as if she was trying to let me know that something was wrong. At this point, my courage turned to genuine curiosity. Something was really strange here, and I kind of wanted to go a bit deeper and see what I could see. I pressed into the dead zone until I got to an area where it was more open. The circle of dead trees wasn't huge. It was just dense and obvious, and in the middle there was a clearing that was decent size that seemed to have been cut out. As I entered into the clearing, the air grew noticeably colder, and it hit a level of silence that was painful. I could hear my heartbeat, my breathing, and the soft whimpering that Maddie was holding back. I stood there in the clearing, looking around and trying to piece together what exactly it was, when I started noticing that the air felt, I guess, stale is the word that I want to use. It was motionless and it had a smell to it that was just empty. I tried to walk into the center of the opening, but Maddie was refusing to move, which was incredibly unlike her. She was an adventurous dog and usually didn't disobey me if I tried to pull her in a direction. And to see her like this made me hit that point where I was second guessing my actions. If she was this scared, then something was going on. I decided that it was time to go ahead and go back. That I'd spent enough time investigating this mystery. And as I turned to walk back to the way I came, the silence was broken by what sounded like a stringed instrument, like a violin. I know that sounds really weird, but as I was walking away, I started to hear something that sounded like someone playing a single, out of tune, and constant note on a violin. That was my breaking point. My slow pace doubled, and I pulled on Maddie's leash and I told her to come. We started with a fast walk, but moved into a jog to get back to the trail, which we did, thankfully. When we got back to the trail, everything seemed to be back to normal. It was warmer, the air was moving, and life had returned to the forest. I stopped to catch my breath, take a big drink of water, and tell myself that I would literally never go back that way again. And after a few moments, I got back to my walk. We still had half the trail to go before we could get to the car. But I felt fine, a little freaked out over what we saw as if it was definitely unnatural. But Maddie, on the other hand, was kind of freaking me out. Every few minutes or so, she would pause and then look back into the direction of where we were, and she would let out a whimper and try to pull me to keep going. She did this for the rest of the walk back to the car, like she was waiting for something to follow us, or like she thought something was there in the distance. Thankfully, she stopped doing this after we got home, and she hasn't had that level of paranoia since then. We also haven't gone back on the trail since that day, because I didn't want to get too close to it at all. The whole feeling was unnerving and terrifying, but I think I was actually feeling a bit more scared with how Maddie was acting on the rest of the hike. I feel like she felt something was following us, like she knew that it was there and she was keeping a close eye on it the rest of that hike. Part of me wonders if something tried to follow me out there, but just didn't for some reason. I don't know. Obviously, I wasn't the only one to have dealt with this, considering people had warned me, which just makes me more curious as to what exactly it was. Some kind of break between our world and the supernatural? Some kind of demonic ground? I have no idea. I no longer live in that town, and unfortunately, Maddie did pass away a couple of years ago. But the memories of that hike, the feelings that I got when I found that clearing, the way she reacted, the sound that I heard, and just everything about it. Those memories have never left me, and they probably never will. I have a really weird story from way back when I was a very young lad. I think at that time I would have been around 12 or 13 at the very oldest. Back then, I lived in my parents' old house, which was pretty much in the middle of nowhere in the northern Midwest. I don't want to give the exact location because I really don't know what this whole thing was about and if it was more serious than I think. I don't want to, I guess, anger someone or something. I know that sounds stupid, but to me it makes sense, especially with what I saw and how it ended up. Back then, I used to spend a lot of time hiking out in the woods behind my neighborhood. There weren't any other kids in my area, and my only sibling was my older sister. So my childhood was honestly pretty boring and void of friendship. I made the best of it though, and I used to make up a lot of fun games with myself. Not that I remember what I used to do. I just used to play some dumb games until I had to go home for dinner. This event actually took place in those woods. It was sometime in the middle of summer because I was out of school and I was home alone for most of the day because my sister was always over at her girlfriend's house. So I just pretty much did whatever I wanted to do. On this day, I was doing as I always did, and I went out into the woods to see what I could get up to. I was out playing, doing a whole lot of nothing, when I noticed something out a bit into the forest. It looked like a person, like it was a person standing in the woods, and they were of an adult's height and stature, but they were just standing there, completely and totally still. I was a bit nervous at first. I hadn't seen anyone in these woods in the years that I have lived there, and most of the people didn't spend any time back there. It was really strange to see this person standing in the woods, and even weirder that they were wearing all black from top to bottom. It looked like they were wearing a ski mask too, since the back of their head was covered in some kind of black cloth as well. Again, this was the middle of summer. It was kinda hot outside, so the fact that they were wearing all black and what appeared to be a ski mask was even weirder. I started kind of creeping around to see what exactly this person was looking at because, like I mentioned, he was just standing there completely stone still. At first, I was kind of sneaking around, but again, he wasn't paying any attention to me. So after a bit, I stopped sneaking and I just kind of started walking around him from a safe distance. Honestly, I wasn't 100% sure that he was actually a person and not a mannequin that was placed there, because he didn't react to me walking around into what would have been his line of sight. As I got around to the front, I noticed two things that made this whole thing even weirder. First off, he wasn't staring at anything. There was nothing in front of him. He was just standing there and looking down at the ground. Secondly, he was wearing a plain white mask with no details. It was a mask that was shaped like a face, but it was just plain white with no other details. So, to reiterate that, this person was standing completely still, wearing all black, including some kind of head cover, and was wearing a white mask with no detail, and he was staring at literally nothing. After just standing there for a few moments, I decided that this was actually terrifying, and I took off to go back home. Again, I kept my distance, but he continued to not pay any attention nor acknowledge that I was anywhere nearby. There was a point where I did get close enough to see that this man was breathing and that this was a person and not a mannequin. I just went home, and I wasn't really sure what I should do or if I should really do anything, because he wasn't hurting anyone or doing anything illegal or anything like that. I told my mom when she got home that there was a man in the woods, and she told me that it was public and that there wasn't anything wrong with that. I kind of just accepted that response and then moved on. But it doesn't quite end there though. There is actually a little more to the story. A couple of days after that happened, I had actually gone back out into the woods because I wanted to see if the man was still there. No idea why I thought he would still be there, or again, as it was a few days later. I guess I just thought if he was there, then whatever he was doing would be considered sketchy, and I could possibly get my parents out there to see what was happening. Of course, he wasn't there. But when I went out to where he was standing, I did find something that I didn't expect. Right where the man was standing was a small wooden cross stabbed into the ground, and the white mask was nailed to where the two parts of the wood crossed over. There was nothing written on the cross. There was nothing else there, just the cross with the mask. But then it was just weird to me. and I had no idea what to think. But now part of me thinks that it had something to do with a cult or something like that, because it was just odd behavior and the whole cross thing was just bizarre. That's actually why I didn't want to mention the location, because if it was a cult thing, I don't want them coming to find me, because I still live in the town. And before anyone asks, no, I never went back to that area of the woods. And no, I never told anyone else about the cross. And no, I have no idea if it's still there. So, to me, this was the scariest thing that I have ever experienced. And I hope that I never experience anything like it again. About 15 years ago, I had something happen to me that has haunted me since the day it happened, and I genuinely do not have an explanation for what exactly it was or how things went the way they did. This is the only time anything like this has ever happened to me, and for that, I am thankful. Mostly because the outcome was not a positive one, and with how everything compounded within a short period of time, I was honestly ready to give up. Obviously, I'm glad that I didn't, but I was ready to. Let me explain how it all went on that day. As I said, it was a decade and a half ago, so it would have been back in 2007. Back then, on Sundays, I used to get together with a few of my girlfriends so that we could get brunch at a local hangout spot that we really liked. It was decently priced and in a good part of the downtown area, and they had a really good food for their brunch menu. When we went during the warmer months, we would always take one of the seats that was on the front patio, as it was always incredibly comfortable sitting outside and having our meal. It had become pretty much the main thing that I would look forward to every week, as the girls that I spent time with were my best friends from high school, as we would just talk and gossip about whatever was on our minds. On this particular day, we were there, eating and just talking about our weeks, when I noticed a man that was sitting on the ground in the nearby park. He was just propping himself against one of the brick retaining walls. This is not a judgmental statement, but he did appear to be homeless, and by that, I mean that he looked like he was a bit unkempt. His clothes were really dirty and a bit ragged, and he just had that weathered look. You know the one, like he had been through a lot and was just doing his best to get through it all. Again, there was zero judgment on my part. He just kind of fit the appearance of what I think of when I think of a homeless man. I will also say that my area doesn't have a large homeless population, so he definitely stood out and caught my attention. After noticing him, I went back to the conversation with my friends and we were just kind of chatting. But then, I looked back over at him and I noticed that he was looking straight at me. As soon as we met eyes, he lifted his hand, gave me a slight wave, and at first I wasn't sure if he was actually waving at me. But when that thought entered my mind, he nodded as if he knew what I was thinking. And he was telling me that he was for certain waving at me. I felt obligated to wave back, and as soon as I did, the man stood up from where he was resting across the street and then started heading toward us. One of my friends asked if I knew him, and I mentioned that I didn't, and they were all kind of asking why he was coming over to us. And again, I said that I didn't know. I just kind of sat there in silence as he approached, like I was in some kind of trance. I didn't know this man. I had never seen him, nor met him, nor spoken to him. But I felt like I needed to hear whatever it is that he was going to tell me. He crossed the road, walked over to where we were sitting, and he actually knelt down right by where I was seated. He reached over, grabbed my hand, and he said, I'm so sorry for what you're about to go through. But stay strong and don't give up. Everything will be okay. Now, this in of itself was actually terrifying. This man just walks up, kneels down, and gives me this cryptic and almost threatening message. But it was even more so when he just stood up without elaborating and then walked away. He didn't go back to the park, he didn't stick around the restaurant, he just walked down the sidewalk until we couldn't see him anymore. Obviously, my friend said that this was really weird and asked if I was okay, and I told them that I was fine and just kind of agreed that it was weird. They kept talking about the whole thing, but after a while, I asked to change the subject because I was kind of starting to feel uncomfortable about the whole thing. Now, as I said, this was weird and kind of creepy. But what happened next was actually what makes this such a haunting situation. That week, the same week that this man told me that he was sorry for what I was going to go through, was the week that I lost both of my parents. It was 6 days later, on that following Saturday. They were out driving, just going out to do whatever it is that they like to do. And their car was struck by a drunk driver driving way too fast and swerving into the wrong lane. They were hit head-on at too high a speed for anyone involved to live, and they both lost their lives, and the driver of the other vehicle died as well. They were all three killed on impact. To say that dealing with losing both your parents suddenly like this was hard is an understatement. It was devastating. It killed me inside, to be honest. I'm an only child, and I had to deal with all of their affairs and their estate and everything, and I was only 24. I had no idea what I was doing with my life, much less how to handle things after my parents had passed. Dealing with their stuff afterwards wasn't the hard part, to be clear. It was the fact that I had to sit there and try to do paperwork, schedule their funerals, talk to lawyers, and I was in that deep pit that grieving shoves you into. I couldn't really focus on anything, and I was holding back sobbing literally every moment that I was awake, which was all of them because let me tell you, my sleep schedule was non-existent. I just wanted to end it all because my parents were my rock. I needed them for guidance in my life, and they were just never going to be there again. On the day of their funeral, my family showed up and everything was so bleak. I felt like I was just empty. I didn't know what I was going to do the next day and the next week, or if it was even worth continuing. And as I was sitting there, mulling over the options, my uncle on my dad's side was up at the podium saying some final words, and he caught my attention when he said, "We have to make sure that we stay strong, that we don't give up, and remember that everything will be okay." When he said this, the thought of that homeless man re-entered my mind. Obviously, I hadn't thought about him with all that was going on, but at that moment, he was all that I could think about. I remembered what he said to me and was again reminded of his words, considering my uncle has said them almost verbatim. I got through the hard parts by just reminding myself that things would be okay eventually, that it was okay to feel pain, that it was okay to have these feelings during this time, so long as I stayed strong and kept going. And for the sake of my parents, I did keep going. I did stay strong, and eventually, things did get less painful. I won't say that it ever hits the point where things are fine. Losing them is still devastating to this day, but I'm able to live my life for me and for them, and I am able to keep a smile on my face and actually mean it most of the time. That all said, that day 15 years ago when that man grabbed my hand and said that he was sorry for what I was about to go through, what was that? Was he clairvoyant and he was able to see it? Was there some sort of otherworldly connection that he and I shared, and he was able to tell what was about to happen? Or was this honestly just a really weird coincidence? In the end, I obviously never saw him again. I tried to find him, but if I ever do, I will thank him for the heads up, and I will thank him for the encouraging message that he gave me. Because as haunting as it's been, it's also because of his words that I realized that I needed to keep going. If he was able to see the bad that was going to happen, then I have to assume that he was also able to see the good. And encouraging me to continue was his way of saying that he knew that things would be okay. And here's the riddle for this video. Hey everyone, this is your creepy sister. Thank you so much for watching the video. I do hope you enjoyed it. Also, don't forget to leave a like and a comment. It really helps the channel out. A big shout out to both my channel members and Patreon members. Thank you so much for taking your support to the next level. You guys are great. And again, to everyone, stay scared because your fear feeds me.